to the middle income track. And of course, to be fair, none of these things were, none of the policies I said were accidental. They would say, oh, just let's split them all up. All of these measures that cost us where we are were introduced for good reasons, but they were like emergency room procedures whose use should have been discontinued after a few years. It's just like if someone has a heart attack and his heart has stopped, you apply CPR. And when the heart gets going, you don't keep on maintaining that moving heart by continuing to apply CPR. It's like, why is Malaysia so centralized? Let me just talk about that one part. It is because, let's ask ourselves, when was the last time the United Kingdom abandoned the market economy? The United Kingdom abandoned the market economy in the last 2 world wars. Because when you're fighting for your survival, you centralize your strength and focus on very few tasks. And Malaysia had that mentality because you were founded in 1957, the middle of a communist insurgency, and in 1963 you faced the confrontation with Indonesia. So that is why in 1965 the government says, instead of wasting our energy with local council elections, let's cancel them so we can all focus our energy against Sukarno. But of course, as history would have it, by September 30th, Sukarno was no more, but our local elections have not come back. The local elections are very important because they make the service providers directly accountable to the local population. By removing that, they remove accountability in a very great way. One could say maybe there was another reason. Another reason was that a lot of the cities were led by people of the wrong ethnic group. If you look at Ipoh, it was the most livable city in 1965 when elections were removed. It was run by the Srivasakan brothers. And Penang was run by the Socialist Front. You know, at the city level, there was no guarantee that the alliance could control it. But at the state level, the alliance could control all of the elected, win all the elections. So that was possibly another reason why that was taken off. But in general, I would not go into details. I would say each of the measures that's hurting Malaysia now had good reasons for their introduction at the time. But they were not replaced. In other words, it's a business that was set up in 1970. It developed a certain business plan, and the business plan was never revised. And that's why we are in the deep doo-doo that we are in. So let me now talk about the other 4 principles. Because in my last 15 minutes, the first principle is, don't look at this. Don't treat the symptoms, treat the root causes. In other words, that is why you have this very strange phenomenon in Malaysia. People elect different parties, present different programs. Like the Karakan said, we'll do A, B, C, D, but they don't ever tell you why we did A, B, C, D. They never tell you what is wrong in the first place. In other words, it's diagnosis-free medicine. You look at our Malaysian government programs, all of them comes out, oh, sorry. Back. What happened is this diagnosis-free treatment is what's giving us trouble. But when I talk about root causes, the usual answer I get is, you are being political. In other words, it becomes almost off-limit to talk about the factors that are making you sick. It's okay to talk about you are having a headache, but it's not okay to talk about what is causing the headache. Now, let me talk about principles 2, 3, 4, and 5. Let us take a very quick look of the world. Oh, okay, one way to talk about what's been happening is like here's Badawi and Najib going for a walk. You know, this is a wonderful day. They're in the forest. And then, what happened? Next slide, please. Because they found that the forest was full of garbage and they had hurt themselves while walking on it. Basically, it's like Badawi and Najib found themselves with Mahathir's policies. And that's why they've been hurting. He said, yeah, we have met the enemy and he is us. A lot of our sickness is self-inflicted. And it is not political, I think, to recognize what ails us, rather than just to have this diagnosis-free medication that we've been given by all these different groups that have come before us. Now let me go to the different principles. One thing I'd like to show is that change is quite normal. Nothing is forever except possibly for love. You can see that the Soviet Union blew itself up after 74 years without being attacked. Park Chung-hee's succession party, the Grand National Party, got defeated in 97. So Hato went out in 98 after 33 years. The Kuomintang was defeated by Chen Shui-bian after 55 years. And Mexico, authoritarian PRI, Party Revolutionary Mexico, was voted out after 71 years. History likes to joke, because let's see what's happened. Today, the Korean party has come out under the daughter of President General Park Chung-hee. The Kuomintang has come back with Ma Ying-jeou, and the Institutional Revolutionary Party of Mexico has come back with Enrique Nieto. There are two things to notice about these groups coming back. The first is when they come back, they don't go back to the original policies. In other words, the chaebol groups in Korea no longer dictate policies the way they used to do during the Park Chung-hee years. The interesting feature is that, what do they do instead then? They are doing the policies of the people who had kicked them out in the first place. Basically, they follow the direction that's been blazed by the folks who had driven them from office. And their legitimacy is, I can do what they do better. In other words, I can do Chen Shui-bian's policy better than Chen Shui-bian. That's Ma Ying-jeou's claim to fame. And Enrique Nieto is the same thing. We want more inclusive growth. We want to deregulate the economy. And what has happened is, once a turning point has been taken, even if the old party were to be voted back, the old party has changed itself. This is an important point. Now let's go to principle 2. Principle 2, from all these experiences that I just discussed, the first one is new broom sweeps clean. Basically, policy turning points are more likely to be undertaken by people who were not invested with the old regime, who are not emotionally committed to the old regime. For example, I like to compare Mikhail Gorbachev, who was a direct descendant of Brezhnev, Andropov, Chernenko, and then him, versus Boris Yeltsin. Why was Boris Yeltsin able to do things 180 degrees different from Mikhail Gorbachev? Because he didn't belong to the Communist Party. He completely renounced them. And if you look at Hua Guofeng versus Deng Xiaoping, Hua Guofeng was the guy who was handpicked by Mao Zedong at his deathbed. And what happened was, he was then pushed out by Deng, and Deng belongs to a different faction in the Communist Party, and because he belongs to a different faction, he did it, he completely reversed it. Why is it that the direct lineage finds it hard to do 180 degrees? It is extremely damaging to the political legitimacy of the incumbent if he reverses direction. Because when he reverses direction, he's admitting that I've screwed up in the last 20 years and I finally saw the true light. But if you've screwed up for the last 20 years, then why are you still in charge? And that is one question they know will be inevitably asked. And so that's why they find it hard to reform. They can only reform if they can say, if they can only do the 180 degrees turn, only if they say, Oh, you see, the world completely changed. We now face this way because the sun rises in the west now, not in the east. In other words, the world changed, so that's why I can move 180 degrees. But if there's been no such big external change, what is the explanation for reversing direction? And more importantly, if you look at Deng Xiaoping, as we know, did his reforms in a gradual, piecemeal basis, compared to Yeltsin, that free all prices at once, stopped the printing of money overnight, and privatized the economy. And what was the immediate economic response? We know that the output of the Soviet Union fell by 10% for the first 2 years, but whereas for Chinese, it grew 9% a year for a long time. So many people therefore thought that principle number 3 should be, when you reform, you should reform slowly. Because you look at the Soviet Union, and you look at Poland. Poland reformed very quickly, and the output fell. So it's often said at that time was, you want to have gradual reform, not big bang reform. Second, big bang reform or shock therapy. That is all bullshit. The speed of reform depends on the task to be done. Some people say reform is like going to the toilet. You first have to adjust your item of clothing, and after adjusting your item of clothing, then you can relax the relevant muscles. If you try to do both simultaneously, it's a big mess. Right? Some reforms may be like that, where sequence is needed. But there are many other reforms where there are no sequence. Like putting on your pair of pants. Does it matter whether it's the right leg that goes in first or the left leg that goes in first? Just as long as the second leg goes in quickly. That's all enough. But what if it is not either toilet or putting on pants, it's putting on sarong? Then the whole idea of sequence is irrelevant. So basically the speed depends on the aspect of the economy being reformed. The idea that slow is good, or the Hokkien people like to say, "My chair gong la." It is not a matter of chair gong. It's a matter of what's the job that's being done. Is it something that needs immediate attention or something that goes slowly? Let me give you another example. Price controls. Think of a centrally planned economy where the prices of everything is controlled. How should you marketize it? Do you control the prices? Some people say you should announce an orderly plan. You say 3 weeks from now, price of soap will be deregulated. Another 3 weeks from now, price of perfume. Another 3 weeks, price of toilet paper. If you announce such a plan, do you know what will happen? Complete mess. Because the people who buy it will want to buy all of it now. The people who sell it will want to hide the goods and sell it afterwards. So when it comes to price liberalization of that nature, you've got to just let it go quickly, simultaneously. Like the way that Ludwig Erhard of West Germany after World War II was the one who came up with this method. Whereas privatization, you cannot privatize very quickly unless you do it in a very efficient and equal manner. How can you privatize something overnight? The only way you can privatize something overnight is the way Yeltsin did it. Whoever is the manager owns it now. No. So what happened? That completely delegitimized it. So what you need to reform determines the speed. Has nothing to do with fast is good or slow is good. And more importantly, there's no relationship between growth and the speed of reform. If you look at every Eastern European economy, fast or slow, output fell. I remember sitting in Parliament in Ukraine where, what's his name? The new president of Ukraine said, "What did we do wrong such that we were given independence?" Why? Because the brightest brains in Ukraine had all gone to Moscow to climb the ladder there. The only people left behind were those who could follow instructions. So when Ukraine was given independence, he happened to be sitting there and he became president. And he didn't know what to do. He did nothing and the economy collapsed. So it doesn't matter. Whatever you do in Eastern Europe, economy collapsed. In the case of East Asia, you pick examples of China, reformed slowly, economy grew 9% a year. Vietnam, in March 1989, freed all prices overnight, cut off all subsidies to state enterprises overnight, brought the dong from 500 dong to $1 to 55,000 dong to $1 immediately. And what happened? Vietnam's growth rate went from 5 to 8 and stayed there until the Asian financial crisis. That's not the lone example, because Laos, the Laos was controlled by the Vietnamese, so they followed what the Vietnamese did. And Laos growth jumped to by 3 percentage points. So the real difference is not fast or slow. The real difference is Eastern Europe, communist Eastern Europe, and communist East Asia. And what's the big difference? The big difference was that communist Eastern Europe were already industrialized, already urbanized, whereas China had only 18% of the labor force not in farming. In the case of Vietnam, only 10% not in farming. In Laos, only 5% not in farming. So you ask yourself, when you were a planned economy and now you convert to a market economy, what would happen in an industrialized, already urbanized society? What was wrong with Eastern Europe? They were already industrialized, but they were producing too much heavy industrial goods, cement and iron, not enough light industry goods, shoes, shirts, washing machines, light bulbs. So the only way to produce more light industries, more light industrial products, is that heavy industrial products had to be let go to die. They were kept alive only because of subsidies. And that collapse in production of heavy industries did not lead to a collapse in the living standard. Why? We saw a 10% collapse in GDP. They say, oh, living standard went up 10%. Not at all. Because the 10% collapse was entirely in the heavy industries. Who eats iron? Who eats cement? So, there was no direct impact on the standard of living. And when these resources moved to the light industries, more shoes, more light bulbs, more shirts, standard of living went up. So in the case of Eastern Europe, it's what we call economic restructuring. You move people from heavy industry to light industries. In the case of Eastern Europe, East Asia, communist East Asia, when you marketize, you unleash the process of industrialization. People came out from the countryside where they were confined by the household registration system and expanded the light industrial sector. So that's the two of them. One is necessarily a painful one. The other one is necessarily a win-win process.